Okay, thanks for the invitation for this lecture series. And I'm especially asked to pay attention to biodiversity and ecology. And I choose the title, Rewilding Cities, Improving the Business Climate for Biodiversity in City Space. Is this better? Is it better? Okay. Okay, let's start. First, some general notions. The first notion is that almost 20% of the Netherlands is city. It is, after the agricultural landscape, the second largest landscape. So we have to regard cities also as a landscape and an ecosystem which comprises patterns and processes. And we are, of course, used to design patterns, but maybe it is also a need to design processes. Of course, the city ecosystem is determined by anthropogenic activities and the urban stock, so the housing and the road infrastructure. And for biodiversity, of importance is the size, the variation, the design and the connectivity of the landscape. And in a process way, the spontaneity and the autonomy of the processes and the management, which can vary from poisoning to leaving it as it is. But the management factor is an important factor. And the quality of the ecosystem is depending on the biodiversity. This has already been shown that the variation is part of the stability, the robustness of the ecosystem. If you have an ecosystem which depends on just a few species with a small genetic variation, then if something happens, a species is lost and this ecosystem collapses. If an ecosystem is depending on many species with a large genetic variation, then it's much more robust and you can lose a species, but the ecosystem will stay more or less intact. So the biodiversity, the value of the value of the biodiversity is also related to the ecosystem services provided by this biodiversity. And Nico already mentioned the productivity, the supporting, the well-being, and other parts of the ecosystems, and which are also an important of city life. So we want biodiversity in the city. It's important, and it was already mentioned. All kinds of facilities have been designed and put in on buildings and other structures. For instance, housing for birds, with also some device to get the droppings from preventing it falling on your head. For bees, bats, insects, all things have been designed. And you can't look at the modern architectural prospectus. All buildings are green. Whatever the ecological value it might represent, but green it should be. But what is the reality? And this is some recent stuff in Leiden, a large auction, which is a local hotspot, a new town quarter, which is completely paved because the soil was polluted. There's some sterile buildings, just glass, steel, and concrete, without any opportunity for cells to attach to it. Also a rather sterile surrounding. These kind of pot plants, fences to prevent birds from breeding, artificial turf, paved gardens, and of course, no weeds allowed. So they are, with all means, destroyed. Now, I come to the urban characteristics, and I will show you why this is not just a irregular series, but in the city, we have to deal with sealing and stony faces, compaction of soils, digging and desiccation, the heating of the soil and the city environment, fragmentation, pollution, enrichment, displacement of soil and materials, artifacts, mixing of soils from elsewhere at a high speed, with a lot of alterations and conversions, high level of disturbance, and also during night, the illumination. And this is just a few pictures representing this series. A lot of waste in the soil. There's a lot of infrastructure. It is busy in the soil. A lot of construction work going on, paved or compaction of the soils, removal of things with steam or heat, and even de-icing in the summer to to prevent the asphalt from becoming weak. So not only in the wintertime, but also in the summertime. And then, of course, we have the largest raptor of the city, the cat. A lot of disturbance by pets. And what is, for instance, the impact of some of these things? An open area, a vegetation, and a stony area, a paved area. Of all the rain falling down in an open situation, about half will evaporate or will infiltrate in the soil. About 40% will evaporate, and only 10% is removed quickly into the ditches or beaches or whatever. So 50% in the soil and 40% in the air gives a large humidity, which is, of course, beneficial for life. In a stony environment, you see that only 15% is able to infiltrate, 55% is immediately removed, and only 30% evaporates. So it is a dry environment. And if you have a compacted soil, then the root system of the plants is deteriorated. The exchange of water from in the soil and from the rain is hampered, and also the exchange of aerial components is hampered. That means that if you want to have certain plant growth, you have to put a lot of nutrients to get the plants a little bit alive, which means a lot of nitrogen exposition, etc. So compacted soils are a negative factor. And sealing, this is just a pavement in a grass field, a small study which shows that the amount of bacteria, the amount of nematodes and of fungi immediately drops significantly when you have a paved surface and a completely paved surface. So life is almost absent below a sealed soil. But still, with this kind of business as usual, animals come to town. And of course, we are very proud that the peregrine is in the city, but they have artificial nests. They eat on the doves and the gulls, which are fed by our waste products and McDonald's food, etc. So it is not a well-developed ecosystem. It is a symbol, but not a symbol of a very leveled ecological structure. The kingfisher stays in the city because the water is warmer, so there's no ice, and it can feed itself during the winter time. And here we have the same series as Nico already showed: safety, food, reproduction, variation, connectivity, and residence, the possibility to stay and to fulfill your life cycle. But mostly that are the generalist species, the pioneers, which are flexible, opportunistic, able to adapt and to learn. They're stress tolerant and mobile. That are the ones which go into the city. And from a plant perspective, what comes to the city comes often from far, and that's because the Mediterranean climatological conditions are more or less mimicked in the city. So we have a lot of plants due to our increased mobility from the Mediterranean area, but also from the Southern Hemisphere, which come to our city, finding a stony, dry and sandy environment. The problem is, here you see red areas, where the most densely populated areas of the globe. Here you see that the color is determined by the losses and the immigration compared to the original species richness. If it is red, it means that there is a higher number of species than originally. So that's good. We have more species than before. The problem is that everywhere the same imported species, immigrant species come. Cities are more alike than they are compared to their own countryside. So we lose the specific species of the region, and we gain the generalists which come from elsewhere, but go also to everywhere. So that means that, globally speaking, we lose biodiversity. And that results that, generally speaking, the fauna is leaving town. The last, say, half a century, the number of species has halved. And one example is the house sparrow, which in just a couple of decades, all over northwestern Europe has dropped and halved its population, especially in the urban areas. So something is happening, and we have to mitigate this. Which brings me back to the, sorry. Is it readable? Yeah, I had a different background color. So my, but what is called biodiversity is a complex concept. That is what is written, and it is an intricate interplay between genes, species, habitats, ecofunctions, time, and space. We already had talked about space, but time is evenly important. And here I have the same series. Actually, we have to mitigate the effect of this and adjust it more to the requirements for biodiversity. And just for the Dutch-speaking people, it is an alliteration of the V's of the city and the V's of biodiversity. But yeah, it's difficult to translate it in that way, but just for the Dutch-speaking. But it means that we have to deal with genes, species, habitats, and functions, not just species, that we have to take care that the soils are able to develop a food web and ecological quality in a way that it also retains water in the area. Vegetation development and ecological succession, and that based on an ecological management and the design being more nature inclusive. And then, of course, the biodiversity depends on the size of the area, the gradients and the continuity, gradients in space and continuity in time. Not every year is something different. And then I think this is important to know that what biodiversity is not. It's not a candy store where you can pick the pets and the cuddly animals. It is not throwing some kind of seed mixture because that's good for the bees. It is not a decoration. It is not planting a couple of trees and pretend it is a forest. The forest is the end stage of a whole series of successional stages with not only trees but also the animals, but especially the soil. And it is not a plannable thing for the color green. It's also not only above the ground. And certainly, which is often neglected, it is not neat. Biodiversity deserves rubbish, so to speak. And here you see some examples. But if you look at biodiversity as that and design for that, then you're spoiling biodiversity patterns. You're actually just pimping up your environment. But this is biodiversity. It itches, it creeps, it is ugly in the human view. And often it is disliked or disgusted. But this is the basis of biodiversity, because this is the basis of our food web and the intricacy of the food web. So if we think about biodiversity, we have to think from onwards, upwards, and think about what we call the hidden biodiversity first. This is already mentioned. Biodiversity is diversity of genes and species. Just to give an example, I don't know why this is enlarged, but this is the blackbird. The urban blackbird is is showing differences compared to the original populations in the forest. It has a different size, a different pitch, and a different feeding behavior. And also this wall barley shows differences between the rural populations and the city populations, probably due to the amount of pets walking around in the city, taking the seeds with them. And then talking about species biodiversity, if we talk species biodiversity, we mainly talk about insect diversity. And second best is fungal diversity. 3/4 of the species diversity are insects and fungi. Whereas, of course, we like to think of invertebrate terms, but that is only a minority in species numbers. And if we look at biomass, it is even worse. 80% of the living mass, biomass, is plant 50% is bacterial biomass. So 95% of all life is plants and bacteria. And then you can't see the segment of the vertebrates. Of course, we have created environments in which the vertebrate part is much larger. Think about agricultural areas where the cow's biomass is much larger than the plant. So we have import all this biomass from elsewhere, and actually we are having a system which is completely out of equilibrium, and that's where we have to deal with and see the other side today. It's also diversity of habitats, and Tom Dentes, who is looking at plants in the cities, divides them into the stony city, the rough city, and the green city. And everywhere there are all kinds of biotopes and possibilities for biodiversity to grow and develop. And it is not nothing, because all the private gardens in the Netherlands comprise about 6 times the area of the Oostvaardersplassen. So we are having a considerable surface area also in the cities. And it's the habitats are not just above the soil. If you compare this lawn with this more weedy vegetation, then in the soil you see here a whole structured root system. All species of plants have different root systems. So you have many more habitats in the soil compared to this lawn where there is only one layer of roots because it is one grass species and it is kept in a very strict way. So the habitat differentiation is also in the soil, which leads to a much higher biodiversity in the soil in terms of invertebrates, in fungi, and microorganisms compared to such an impoverished system. So we have to look at the soils, and the soils is a very intricate system. We have layering, not only with the roots, but also with the faunistic component, with in the litter a lot of arthropods, and then becoming more and more microbiome downwards. But in a mature soil, you have a layering and with different fauna elements. Of course, there is a connection, the worldwide root system, which the roots of plants are connected to each other, but especially they are connected through the hyphae of mycorrhiza, which is indeed an information exchange system. Plants react on certain external stress factors through the hyphae they are connected to. And then the soil, as already mentioned, has a ripening period, a ripening from an immature soil to a mature soil. I will come back to that later. And in the soil, you have a very intricate, very complex food web with a lot of trophic levels, a lot of components. And all in all, there are an enormous amount of organisms in the soil. This is the number of organisms in a square meter, the biomass in an hectare, and the species numbers per square meter. And what you see there are very high numbers. And also in weight, it is enormous. In a well-developed, so ripe soil, you may encounter 2 or 3 elephants in biomass, in microorganisms. We don't realize it, but there is an enormous amount of life. Soil is life. Clay is dead, but soil is life. And then from a more inhabitant point of view, many people want more biodiversity, and then they go to the garden center and they buy plants and seed mixtures, which end up with very many exotic cultivars, sterile plants, while with sitting on your hands, you have much more plant life, you have much better biodiversity, which is also more connected up with the local hidden biodiversity. So this is what I call rewilding cities. We have to think, how can we manage to allow and stimulate this kind of spontaneous plant growth? So we have to try to design processes. This is a spatial design, and I compare it always to a color plate of children with small patches, and they are all colored, and it is fully filled. And then comes the next phase, how to maintain it. But that's another organization. It's not part of the design people. That are the management people, and they think completely different. And how will it look like in 5 or 10 years' time? And this is how you can try to manage processes. Just a bare land, a wasteland, and let it grow. And eventually you might have a nice park full with trees and other. And the management type depends whether you have an open vegetation or a closed vegetation or whatever. You can play around with that, and people will choose their own routes to walk, which is often a menace for people who think in neat terms. They have to walk like this, so we pave it like that, and then it's stubborn like they are, that they just choose their own road. But so it is autonomy. And this is a kind of way we often think. Well-designed, well-placed plants, color by color and species by species. And then we have to take insecticides, and we have to plant mature plants, and have to use a lot of fertilizer. Whereas it can also be like this. Just manage your vegetation, let natural enemies eat the potential plagues, make use of the reproduction of the plants, because ants and other animals will bring in the seed. And of course, we like butterflies, but we remove the caterpillars. And I think you may know that caterpillars are a phase of the whole life cycle of butterflies. So if you destroy this, then you also destroy that, only indirectly, but not many people realize that. So think in life cycles. Nico also mentioned that. And with ecological management, you can achieve a lot with a simple change. This is a soft ditch. And if you create and manage soft ditches, then immediately you see that the number of individuals and the number of species of, for instance, damselflies and dragonflies will increase. But not only these taxa, but also for the mammals, the birds and the butterflies, they will increase if you have a different management regime of your ditches, and also a different design of your ditches. It's a small difference with a small effort, or a large difference with a small effort. I call it ecological network, but actually the term ecological management matrix is better. It is not just a lining, but it is the whole matrix over the city, which should be more ecological. And that are, of course, the areas, the corridors, and the sites. Connectivity, size, and extension of the network is important. Green, blue, brown, and dark has also been mentioned, but it is also the scales. The scales you have to think in, the scales from street to town quarter to town to whole landscape. And then you touch upon the topography. Nico has also mentioned what is the natural condition and how can we use or actually try to incorporate the original natural soil condition and other things like old growth, mature soils, and even the buildings should be included. And that all depending on a good management and design of processes. To give an example of the scale, you have this is an example of Leiden. You have the green infrastructure in the policy papers of the city, which is connected to the nature areas in the surroundings. So this is that scale. And here you have the ecological network in the soil, the small pores and small holes and corridors for the water, the gas exchange, but also for the microbes to be able to move from one side to another side and be connected. And then in between you have for instance, the street, the tiles, the grown over streets or the grown over feet of the trees. Then also you have the scale in time, the temporal scale. Most biotic processes don't take too much time. Most ecological processes take a little bit more time. But eventually the succession, the ripening of the soil and the development of a vegetation takes a lot of time. And with one Wrong move, you can destroy centuries of soil formation, of vegetation development. So this is important also to take it out that a well-developed vegetation and a ripened soil actually is an almost non-renewable source, natural source, because you destroy it, it takes decades at least to come back a little bit. And these street plants are actually the ecological network at the level of the hidden biodiversity, because they can move through these very small highways of plants and soil from one side of the road to the other side of the road, for instance. Now, the urban climate, you may be well aware of the urban heat island effect. And maybe I just show it, but maybe you're already aware of it, that it is especially a night problem. Because day over, you see here that the dunes and the agricultural area here are just as heated up as the city environment. But in the night, the dunes cool down, the agricultural open area cools down, but the city doesn't. The city doesn't get rid of its heat. So especially because it is really warming up and stays like that in the night, causes this urban heat island effect, partly, of course. Because what you also see is that where there is vegetation, it is cool. Where there is our industrial plants with a lot of black, it is heated up. And here in the city of Leiden, you see that the park of the Singel really reflects it in cooler temperatures compared to the high densely built up inner city. Here there is the parks lines the green area, and here you see that it is also cooling. But on the other hand, it is also sharply bordered. It is not that a large vegetated area is infiltrating low temperatures, cooling down also the surroundings. Here you see a rather heated up area close to a much cooler area. Now, these are, of course, the ecological disasters, in a way, all these industrial plants, which even are not built to carry solar cells, for instance. And at the scale of the street, for instance, here you see a tree and the shade and the full sun of a house, and it can already be about 30 degrees difference in an attic in the full sun compared to the full shade. So it is quite a temperature gradient you can see, and the effect of vegetation on that. But it can even on the smaller scale of the street, of the pavement. Of course, this is the way I want to see it. This is the way how the city management often wants to see it, and the citizens. This is a nicely grown street. This is the Catharijne area in Utrecht. And if you look at the heat map with infrared, you see that such a closed pavement is completely hot heat. But if you look at a small scale at the stones, then you see that the plants are about 30, 35 degrees, and that in the midst of the stones, it is over 50 degrees. At the level of a couple of centimeters, you can have 20 degrees difference, which of course makes overall also a difference. The more you can create this plant growth in the pavement, the better the temperature regulation will be. And then we have to deal with the CROE, the CROW, which is the general standard for how you call image quality of the urban environment, and what you have to get rid of, and that is mostly the plants. Trees in the city. For the London area, they have calculated that all the carbon in the trees is about a globe of about 1.5 kilometers of pure carbon dioxide. So it is an enormous amount of sequestered CO2. But actually, what is mostly sequestered is the carbon sequestered mostly is in the soil, the organic component of a mature soil. About 3/4 of all the carbon which is connected to a tree is in the organic material in the soil. In the wood, it is only 1/4. And if a tree is cut down, then only that 1/4 evaporates again in the air, but 3/4 stays in the air, unless you're also changing the soil. If you are also opening up the mature soil, then that organic component will also evaporate in the air. But the soil is the most important sink of carbon in a woody environment. And how to deal with the urban climate and trees. Mostly people say, well, we have to have climate adapted trees. So we have to get them from California or southeastern China or whatever, a lot of exotics. But if you look at very common trees, the poplar and the oak tree, you see that they have an enormous area, the distribution area, reaching to the south, reaching to the east. In the genetic material of our indigenous species, there is enough variability to also grow in harsh conditions of the city, much more than we often expect them to be. And as Bert Maas says, well, most oak trees have suffered a lot of climatic change already, so they have proven that they are able to survive. There's much more possible with indigenous tree, apart also from what they contribute, what their coexistence with insects, fungi, lichens, and other organisms, which is much better than trees from far away. So actually we have to think in ecological terms and not in decoration terms. This is what I call decoration green. Plants are grown on purpose to fit in the design. Instead of that, the building is a substrate which allows for plants to grow and take their own pace and their own route. And actually what we have to change is having this kind of designs. You know, this is a vacated industrial site in the Roos area. It's now a nature area. And actually what I advocate is that we try to see how we can manage to have this spontaneous plant growth on newly designed buildings. Here it is very neat, sharply bordered. All species are selected and planted on purpose. Whereas if you can combine that with a building which has some structure and relief, with spontaneous plant growth, it can be a much better contribution to biodiversity. So we come to roofs now. Rooftop as a novel ecosystem in the cities. We already use that because ecoducts are actually vegetated roofs. In a way, it is a concrete layer with on top of it a lot of structure. Nico also mentioned to connect green roofs in an ecological network on the top of buildings. You can combine functions, and actually this idea came from me because I did some canopy walks in the tropics, and actually that is also what you can do. A roof walk instead of a canopy walk should be possible to have a second ecological network at level. And these green roofs also contribute to buffering the city climate, because here you see an area, a dark roof which is completely heated up, and a well-developed vegetated roof which is quite dark. The difference is about 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 40 degrees centigrade. So it is a huge difference. And here you also see that even a narrow layer of sedum roof already makes a difference with the wall besides it. So green roofs are a must, you might say. And depending on the thickness of the substrate layer, you can expect much more plant and animal and fungal biodiversity to develop. But it shouldn't be isolated. Don't put a small rooftop garden in an isolated skyscraper, because it is isolated and it won't develop. It should be connected and do so part of an ecological matrix, an ecological network. And then it is good to know that it has climate capacity, buffering capacity, that the depth of the substrate is positively connected to water retention, for instance, with the help of a mineral wool, and that will increase the biodiversity. Just sedum has a very short flowering period, but if you allow spontaneous plants, even in the sedum roof, spontaneous plant growth, you will prolong the flowering season, which also will increase the insect diversity. Nico already showed the ebon roof, which proved that soil transplantation from the surroundings increased the floristic and faunistic colonization of a roof, and it gives it a head start. Bees are the cows in insect terms. Don't use too much beehives because they are a competitor of natural pollinators. So they have a negative impact on insect diversity. And also additional nutrients. Of course, it will stimulate the growth of biomass, but biomass, and that speeds up the growth of the plants, but it makes them also vulnerable for stress factors like drought or heat. So with a low amount of nutrients, the plant growth will be much more sturdy, and the effect will be that the plant species will survive better. So it will the lack of nutrients actually increases by plant diversity. Now, towards nature-inclusive cities, start from management and design, starting from the V's of biodiversity, so safety, food, etc. The biggest innovation in my view is that we have patience and acceptance of ecological processes and the pace of ecological processes. I think in 4 dimensions, so not just the 2-dimensional map, sorry, but also in the 3 dimensions of the buildings and of time. And then this, in my idea, is the traditional city, compact city with a lot of buildings and sharply bounded the green infrastructure. And actually, if we can turn that into a much more continuous landscape with gradients, and in which a large part of the buildings have been covered with green roof ecosystem, and all the Ks, if they have to be vertical, are designed to have plant growth on all sides, then we have a much better city environment, at least from my biodiversity point of view. And of course, think from hidden biodiversity from the start. All the minute organisms, not only in the soil, but also on the surface and on the surface of trees, they have their influence on the microclimate. We have just started an NWA program to investigate what the effect, the effect is of hidden biodiversity on the microclimate in the cities. And then the city environment gives a lot of habitats which you can make use of. And you will be surprised how many beautiful plants there will appear. And my question is, do you recognize this one? You all know them probably, but maybe you don't recognize them because you avoid them. This is the stinging nettle. So if you have a hand lens, then you see how beautiful the small flowers are. And the stinging nettle, don't remove them because they are the fodder for a lot of caterpillars and butterfly species. So a certain amount of stinging nettle is advantageous, and to create a complex situation where it never can be the dominant factor. That's what I wanted to tell you about ecology and cities and my view on biodiversity. I hope you have put up different glasses now, if you look to the city.
Hey, thank you very much, Marco. Questions? Yeah, I was hoping, I thought there must be one question, but I'm thinking what you will, but please go ahead.
You talked about using soil transplantation from the surrounding on the roof. But I think you have to be very careful with that because on a roof garden, you need substrate. And with natural soil, there's a big chance that the permeability from the drainage layer is built, and then there will be a roof pond instead of a roof garden.
But what I meant with transplantation, we used the size of a tile, of a pavement tile, to put on the substrate of the roof, that it gives a head start with the hidden bio of the microbiome and the seed bank, etc. So it was not put the complete soil on top of it, but it was to give it a head start.
Only the director of Eben was not so happy with the wild grass growing everywhere, so we had to stop that project.
Yeah, that's the problem with the. I have contacts with somebody who makes green roofs, and the grass is a curse for him. And then I asked, does it influence the effectiveness of the roof? No, I don't like them. So that's.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Yes. What about humidity in ecology when you speak about gardens on buildings?
Yeah. Of course, what we found out is that this mineral wool will help to retain water, but we shouldn't aim for too much luxurious plant growth, because actually I was more thinking about the dune environment. On top of especially the high buildings, you have high evaporation, sun rays, so it is a stressful habitat, and that's like in the dunes. So think about a more drier, adaptive vegetation type, or an inland sand areas vegetation type, which don't try to change the conditions to grow the plants you want to grow, but on the other hand, take these conditions into consideration and what kind of biotope. Nico was already thinking biotopes, what kind of biotope can be present on that position, locality.
I'm living in Rotterdam, and yesterday I got a letter from the municipality telling me, and I think all people living in Rotterdam, that we have a lot of lead in the ground. So I'm living in the orange, my garden is orangey polluted. So it's really like, what can you do? Don't touch the ground, don't go there, don't play in it. I really got a kind of a bit of a shock on that note, which I just spread around for everyone. So I don't know. Can you say a bit more about the earth which is polluted? That was the impression I got.
In Leiden, the area I showed in Leiden town quarter was fully paved, and the people were advised not to grow vegetables and to eat them. But yeah, but the thing is that this kind of pollution, brings its own it doesn't change biodiversity in the way it changes the health of people. So actually, it is also a chance to give natural processes their way. But if you want to grow vegetables, then it is a risk. But like Chernobyl, we can't survive, but there is luxurious wildlife going on there. So it is also a chance. But maybe not what you want.
Do you know something about phytoremediation plants or phytoremediation? So plants which take out the heavy metals?
There are some plants, yeah. That is also, but it again, it is patience. It is patience, yeah. But on the other hand, I heard a story from Amsterdam that they transported soil to be cleaned in Rotterdam, and they got the same soil back, and it was hardly changed. So everything happens.
Stefan?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for giving us this insights. But I think green in the city is not only about ecology, it's also about culture. So, and you say, okay, there's, let's say, this kind of discrepancy, what people actually like or want and what is real biodiverse or increasing biodiversity in the city. So I wonder, is there also a possibility to balance these two things and to make environments which are liked and at the same time can also contribute to a more biodiverse environment.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that we have to find a balance, but a different balance than it is now. And now, for instance, some people very much like the design of the Catharijne single in Utrecht because it is so neat and so tidy, etc. I don't like it. So it is also a matter of taste, what you like or not, and that can change. It's if there is information why things are becoming different to the citizens, that it is because of this reason, that the benefits are in terms of microclimate and other aspects they also might like. For instance, you have to accept caterpillars if you like butterflies. If people don't realize that the butterflies are a phase in the life cycle of caterpillars are a phase in the life cycle of butterflies, and they remove them without knowing that the butterflies will disappear as well. With that information, you might already change their habit. And there are many more aspects where you can change the cultural attitude in a way. I think
about what you I get a feeling if I so basically we can say, oh, it's all wild, and then people say, what a rubbish. Yeah, that's one. Or we say, oh, everything is designed and intratuin plants. That's the other end. So is there something in between? Let's for instance that you say, okay, let it go wild, but we can still design.
Yeah,
that's what you mean? Huh? No?
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah, I think it's more like it can be like a casco. Eh? So when you look in, for instance, to some of the historical gardens, they are sometimes very, how to say, architectural in a way, but at the same time also allowing kind of unexpected developments to happen. They become also like ecological valuable in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, they like a bookcase. In a way, they organize and they give a kind of cultural expression, but at the same time, it provides space for ecological succession or let's say the soil to develop in a proper way, et cetera, et cetera. So is that also not something where designers or ecologists should look at on what kind of typologies or models we could develop in order to stimulate that? Because what I feel, even let's say the simple greening by intratuin plants is already very difficult because most people, they just want to have it paved because it's easy to maintain. So then let's say the first step is already to have some green in the garden. That's already a very big step. But then when you say a step extra, actually you don't have to do anything. I just get rid of the pavement and nature will take over. That's, let's say, another big step, I would say. So I think for designerly disciplines, it would be very interesting to look for a kind of models which mediate a little bit and, let's say, serve the best of both worlds.
I understand you, and I'm not advocating that you do nothing, because I always say you have to manage. So if you have an open vegetation, then you have to manage it as an open vegetation. But my idea is that keeping a vegetation open is pushing back the succession once more to an earlier phase. That there are historical landscape elements, and in those cases, and also if there is an intratuin vegetation, so to speak, the plants are out of the biodiversity because they are not part of the biodiversity. They're like a brick wall, or there's substrate for passing by insects.
This is a nice clue for us as well, for to design with. So thank you for that. Remark. Yeah. Last question before the break, then we still have half an hour.
Yeah, and maybe it has also to do with changing the mentality, and realizing that if we want to have green, we also have to take care of it. So we also cannot expect, I think it's also too easy to say we just made something when nature just goes by itself. We have to be aware that we need to have, how do you say, attention to that. But my question is another one. I was wondering, you showed one example, one picture from the work of Piet Oudolf, and I was wondering how do you see his work, because it looks very natural, but it's also very much designed. So how is it from an ecological and biodiversity point of view? I was curious. Piet Oudolf.
From a ecological point of view, it is a very odd and poor, this kind of combination of plants, because the plants are from elsewhere, the plants are cultivated, the plants are often sterile. He is painting with plants, which as a biologist is a rather curse, but the ecological value is rather meager, in my view. Yeah. And yeah. It are colors for humans and not colors for other organisms.
I think Piet Oudolf's mainly using a North American assortment of plants, like Echinacea, certain grasses, and many others, but you can easily replace them with locals.
Yeah.
So there's many local plants which you can, so let's say the design and even the painting with plants, whatever he calls it or he dreams about, is that you can still use that, but you can replace the certain plant selections with locals. We try to do that at the Bouwpub. We also tried to do that with local dune vegetation, which was completely native plants. But yeah, for ornamental reasons, I also added some asters from North America because I wanted to be in flower now as well, so that the students who have a beer there also think, oh,
that's the
rubbish.
start of invasive.
My beer in there, you know what I mean? So, yeah. So, but yeah,